Good morning. I'm Anna Maria Tremonti, and you're listening to The Current. Coming up in half an hour, I'll speak to Afghan-Canadian journalist Nelufar Pazira. She is our Friday host this week. She is in New York City getting ready for tomorrow's program about the legacy of the attacks of September 11th. 10 years on. Plus, we'll open up the mailbag to find out what you've had to say about everything from oil sands to school lunches to vibrators. But first, the very long arm of American tax law. Well, the phrase, no taxation without representation, has been a rallying cry among Americans from the Boston Tea Party right up to the current Tea Party. But according to U.S. law, the Internal Revenue Service is permitted to dip into the pockets of about 1 million Americans living in Canada, many of whom haven't voted in an American election in their lives, choosing instead to live, work, and pay taxes here in Canada. Despite that, they're required by law to disclose to the IRS any bank holdings over $10,000, and they may face a penalty of up to $10,000 per year per account if they do not. There was a time when the IRS didn't appear to be all that serious about enforcing its law, but now that time is gone. The IRS has given Americans living in Canada until tomorrow to file something called an Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Initiative form. Those who do hope to walk away with a smaller penalty. Those who don't are on their own. Maury Williams has decided to take the offer. He is an American-born Canadian citizen. He teaches history at the University of British Columbia. He has lived in Canada since 1973, and he's in Kelowna. And Bob has decided not to file the disclosure form. We are withholding his last name because he fears the IRS may try to track him down. But we can tell you that Bob came to Canada in 1970, and he became a Canadian citizen in 1975. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Well, hi. Well, let's start with you, Maury Williams. When did you first learn that you're supposed to be disclosing your bank account information to the Internal Revenue Service of the U.S.?
I found out in the late spring, actually I think it was probably in May, when I went to our accountant and was discussing this. My wife inherited a small piece of property from her mother in Texas when she died in the spring. So we thought, well, we should sort that out, and went to our accountant, and they said, oh, by the way, you do know you're American citizens, and you should be filing.
How did you react?
Well, the way the accountant put it at first, it was not going to be too serious. So we should file our back taxes, our forms for our back taxes back 6 years. And then, particularly in my wife's case, we would explain why she had not filed, and in my case, why we had not filed, that we didn't understand that we were supposed to, and that our accountant said at that stage she assumed there would be no penalty, primarily because they had experience in dealing with in the past, and the IRS had been generally quite lenient when you did a voluntary disclosure.
Filing your back taxes, were you working in the States?
No, I've never worked in the States. Other than as a summer student. But I've been in Canada since 1973, which is just about the time I began my professional career. So I've never worked in the United States.
Okay, so back taxes, you actually don't have any income to report to them?
No, none. And actually, when you get down to it, it's not the issue of filing the back taxes, but it has to do with the penalties associated with the non-disclosure of non-U.S. financial accounts, and that's where the big penalty comes in.
Okay, well, let's hold that thought because I'll go back to that. Bob, did you know you were supposed to be filing bank account information with the IRS?
No, not at all.
And how did you find out?
I heard a CBC item a few weeks ago. Didn't think it applied to me because I was a Canadian citizen. I've been one since 1975. And then, lo and behold, someone said, well, it does apply to you. And I started seeking information. I went to a lawyer, went to an accountant, a financial advisor, and no one really had any information for me. I haven't decided not to file. I just I don't have enough information to know what is going on.
You're just not sure then.
Yeah.
And do you have any assets in the States?
I have nothing in the States. I've never worked in the States other than during the university down there, and then when I graduated, I came to Canada to do my graduate work.
How old are you guys?
I'm 64.
Maury, how old are you?
I'm 67.
Okay. Now, so Maury, you say you haven't disclosed your accounts, like what? Like bank accounts, RRSPs, things like that?
Yes, under the provisions of the IRS, you must disclose your RRSPs, your registered education savings plans, your tax-free savings accounts, all of your bank accounts. In other words, basically all of your financial and liquid assets. They don't go after, things like your home. But on your liquid assets, then if you file under this voluntary disclosure initiative, the minimum you will pay will be a 5% penalty on the highest balance of one of your years for the last 8 years.
So what would the minimum you think you'd have to pay be?
Well, I've been told that mine will be somewhere in the order of $10,000 to $11,000. But there's a rider to this, and this is what is galling. The IRS has made this so complicated that it's impossible for an individual to sort this out. You must deal with an accountant. And the accountant's fees would run in the order of $15,000 to $20,000. That, by the way, is an estimate that comes from the Financial Post. They said even the most straightforward process will be about $15,000. So in other words, it's going to cost more to pay for the accountant and lawyer fees than it is the actual penalty. There's no way you can do without it.
And by voluntarily disclosing your account information, you're hoping, they'll go easy on you?
Well, it's not a question of going easy. It's in order to... How do I explain this? I'm seriously considering, now that they're advising me that I'm a U.S. citizen, of renouncing my U.S. citizenship and doing it in a formal manner. And in order to do that, you must bring your taxes up to date. So one of my motives in doing this is the potential renunciation of U.S. citizenship. You would give up your American citizenship?
So right now you're a dual citizen, but you've been living here, working here, but you'd give up your American citizenship over this?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, I'm a Canadian. I've lived here since 1973. I've been a citizen since 1968. I have no link to the United States. I have no other outside of family, of course. I have no financial interest. I have no income. I don't identify with the United States. So it was actually quite a shock to discover that I was still considered an American citizen.
Wow. Bob, what do you estimate you and your wife owe?
Oh, goodness, I have no idea. I've heard that the penalty was up to 25%, and to me that would be just devastating. The interesting thing is that we never considered ourselves Americans when we came here. We became, as I said, citizens in 1975, and the law then in the United States was that you lost your U.S. citizenship if you swore allegiance to a foreign power, and we certainly swore allegiance to Canada and have lived by it. And so we're just shocked, absolutely shocked.
And but the concern is obviously that if you file, you're going to take a financial hit.
Yes, yeah, a big one.
And you're retired now?
I'm retired, yes.
And so, what do you think it would do to your savings?
Well, if they take 25%, I've been told that. I mean, we'll just try to. We've estimated our RSPs, and that's all we have are RSPs. We have nothing else. To last us about 20 years. I'm 64 now, and that was the goal. And just take 5 years off of your retirement. How would you feel?
I'm just going to clarify again. You both have paid Canadian income tax. You haven't hidden from the Canadian tax person.
We've complied with everything in Canada from the beginning.
Okay. Now, what about your kids? Because if you're Americans and aren't your kids automatically Americans, does this affect your kids?
Yes. This actually is one of my biggest concerns, is that the children of American citizens are automatically considered Americans. And that's even if you just have one parent who is a U.S. citizen. So that these penalties and the requirement for filing carries down to all of our children. And their children should file by tomorrow. They would be subject to the same 5 or 25% penalty of their liquid assets. In many cases, these children have never set foot in the United States. They don't have any affiliation with the United States. They're Canadians. They were born here. They were raised here. They're educated here. They have no link or contact to the U.S. And yet, according to U.S. tax law, they must file, and they're subject to all the penalties. So if Bob and I are talking about taking a big financial hit as, we're at retirement age, think what this does to a young family. I'll take my own children, for example. They have small families. They're trying to buy a house. They're paying into their RRSPs, into the education fund for their children. They're trying to take advantage of the tax-free accounts. They would have to report all of that to the United States, and then they would be subject to that 5 or 15% or 25% penalty.
Okay, and if they don't do that, I'm just wondering if then what? You end up in a computer. Will you be able to go to the States easily, or could you be detained if you don't do this?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm making an assumption that if you don't file, then you are putting yourself at risk if you wish to go to the United States. So obviously the easiest or the safest thing to do is then never to go to the United States again. And
how realistic is that?
I think that would depend upon the individual. I mean, if you've got a family, grandparents, or siblings who live in the United States, obviously you'd like to spend some time with them.
Bob, how about you? I mean, do you have family?
For me, it's very easy. My parents are dead. My sisters are dead. My wife, however, has a mother who's 86. That's a tough one, and it's very, very. I mean, I made the decision. I just wouldn't travel down there. But what I don't know, I mean, and these are the questions I have, and I've asked people, and I've asked lawyers, and they can't give me an answer. Is that, can the U.S. law just come in and take, our RSPs away from us, and can they do that? Or is it simply that if we went into the United States, we would be subject to their law? I mean, I don't know. No one else has been able to give me an answer on that.
Bob, what I've been advised is that the IRS could not come into Canada to seize any of your assets, because then they would have to deal with the Canadian government. So in that respect, I feel somewhat safe. But on the other hand, if you do go to the United States and you're in their computer system and you're found out, then you would have to deal with their civil and potential criminal charges.
Still lots of questions. And the deadline is tomorrow.
The deadline is tomorrow for this. I mean, my perspective on this is, especially for our children, that this is the point where the Canadian government must get involved. I mean, we're dealing with Canadian citizens who are born and bred, raised and educated in Canada. They are not Americans by the very nature of their upbringing, and yet the United States is trying to grab money from them. So the Canadian government, I feel, really must step in and assist that generation of Canadians.
Bob, you're trying to do that as well, right? You're trying to get some answer from the Finance Department.
I did. I wrote the Minister of Finance, and I wrote a number of politicians, my MP, Megan Leslie, and Megan responded very, very quickly, which I appreciated.
And Maury, you wrote to President Obama, didn't you?
Well, actually, I've done two things. I've contacted my MP, Ron Cannon, and he's also been very sympathetic and helpful. In fact, the information I forwarded to him, he sent on to Minister Flaherty. But I also have written to President Obama because there's an issue, as you raised at the very beginning, of taxation without representation. So if I'm considered an American citizen, then who represents me? I have no contact with anybody in the House of Representatives, nobody in the Senate. The only election I could vote in, if I so chose to do so, would be the presidential election.
Right, okay.
So that makes Obama my elected representative.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, I do have someone here who is a cross-border tax lawyer, and I'm going to ask her for some clarification on this. But thank you for telling us your story, and keep listening. Listen to what our next guest says. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna Maria.
That's Maury Williams, a professor of history at UBC. He spoke to us from Kelowna. Bob joined us from Halifax. We withheld his last name at his request to protect his identity as he tries to figure out what to do. You are listening to The Current on CBC Radio 1 and Sirius Satellite Radio 159. I'm Anna Maria Tremonti. Well, for some clarity on what's behind the IRS crackdown and how the law works when it comes to the offshore Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Initiative. We're joined by Christine Perry. She is a cross-border tax lawyer with the firm Keele Cottrell. She is in our Toronto studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I will leave the thoughts about accountants and what they cost beside for a moment and just get to these stories. Are you surprised at their confusion?
No, this is what I've been seeing frequently over the past couple of months since this program was announced in February. And their story is quite common, and I can totally understand their confusion because, as the two guests were saying, they've lived in Canada most of their adult life, if not all of their adult life, have been completely tax compliant here in Canada, and suddenly are being asked to ante up to the U.S., a country that they really feel that they have had no connection with. And there's a variety of circumstances, so people tend to fall somewhere on a spectrum. So we have some people that really were born in Canada, have never lived or worked in the States, and have no connection there. And then at the other end, we have people that are carrying current passports who, in fact, vote in elections, but who live here in Canada and just haven't filed their tax returns.
So you could be, You could be born in Canada of American parents and still have to comply with this law, even though you spent your entire life here?
Correct. So if you're born outside of the States to two U.S. Citizen parents, then you would be a U.S. citizen. You can also be a U.S. citizen if you're born outside of the States to one U.S. parent under certain circumstances. So, of course, just because you're a U.S. citizen at birth, you can always have the option of renouncing, but certainly you do become a citizen at that point.
Can you renounce your citizenship for tax purposes?
No, you can't renounce your citizenship or you can renounce it for any reason you want, obviously, and certainly that would be a strong motivator in today's climate. But the problem with renunciation is there's sort of two components. There's an immigration component and a tax component. So you could go down to the consulate tomorrow if you could get an appointment. I'm sure they're quite busy right now. And you could renounce for sure. From a tax perspective, though, IRS takes the position that you have to both renounce formally for immigration purposes, and you also have to provide them notice of your renunciation. And I think, as one of your guests mentioned, he's quite knowledgeable about this, but you have to certify under penalty of perjury that you've been tax compliant for the last 5 years, which obviously people with tax motivation can't do that.
Right. Okay. Now, my understanding is that this requirement to disclose bank accounts has been on the books for years. Why is the IRS all of a sudden cracking down on Americans to file this offshore voluntary disclosure initiative?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's definitely been a policy shift because this form, TDF 9022.1, to be exact, it's actually when you fill out your Form 1040, which is your U.S. tax return, it actually asks you there, do you have any foreign bank accounts, yes or no? And if you check yes, which you should if you have Canadian accounts, which we don't tend to think of as foreign, of course, it directs you to fill out this form. But in the past, even 5 years ago, we would send these forms in with absolutely no response from the IRS. And so it was something that they never paid attention to. I think it's a combination of different things. We saw a lot of activity with real offshore tax havens. We had the UBS scandal.
That's the Swiss bank.
That's the Swiss bank, yes. Everything that's been happening in Switzerland, where a lot of taxpayer information or U.S. taxpayer information was turned over to the U.S. government. And we had a lot of initiatives within the U.S., dealing with actually credit card companies such as MasterCard and Visa to get information turned over on U.S. persons who held credit cards related to offshore accounts. So I think the climate has just changed. Of course, we have the huge U.S. deficit, so they certainly...
But so they're broke, so they're going after the Canadians now?
Well, I mean, it's just an observation, but, perhaps it's not a coincidence.
We may think that, but they're not going to tell us that.
Of course, right?
Okay, but you bring up the Swiss accounts because they have been trying to get their hands on information on Swiss accounts, and then we're talking millions. But Swiss bank accounts are secretive. I mean, the whole point, and they're tax haven or secretive accounts where people hide money versus these people who just never, they haven't lived there, they haven't worked there forever, and they do actually pay their taxes and disclose in their own country. So it seems kind of are they going after the Canadians because they have to go after the Swiss and they don't want it to look bad? Is that?
Yeah. I mean, the whole position is a bit nonsensical, as you say. We have real tax havens and real tax dodgers who are earning income offshore that's not being taxed. And then we have, obviously, Canada is the furthest thing from a tax haven where we have very high tax rates. And the problem, especially with the disclosure program that's in effect right now, is the person with the offshore Swiss account and the Canadian guy who's been working here, paying his taxes, saving in his RSP, are treated identically. And I think that is a problem with the program for sure.
Because we're not talking about American citizens who live in the States and who are in Canada, say, for 5 years to work. Those people would naturally file taxes in both countries, right, usually?
Right. I mean, and they would most likely be aware of their filing obligations. But to be honest, I've come across a lot of situations, and a lot of my colleagues have, where there's actually people that are domestically in the U.S. that have not been reporting foreign bank accounts. So they may not hold those bank accounts for any illicit purpose, but they may have come from England and they have accounts over there. So it's hitting a lot of people. And the program initially, I think it looked like it was going after people in tax havens, but I think the program has evolved or devolved, depending on your perspective, over the course of it. And really, the net that's being cast is quite wide. And I don't know if that's accidental or not. It's hard to tell anymore. The goal of the program, according to the IRS, is to encourage people to come back into the system. But of course, a 25% penalty on your financial assets is not very encouraging.
So are you spending all your time on this issue?
Right now, I am. Yes, it's been a long summer.
And so, I mean, what's the mood of the people who see you? Are they panicked?
There's a lot of fear. People are scared. Just, as your guest mentioned earlier, people, especially in their retirement age, they had not been planning for this, obviously, and suddenly it looks like a large part of their assets will be wiped out. I mean, even 5% penalty, which, many Canadians would qualify for that reduced penalty. It's a huge amount to pay. And so I have a lot of people that have been participating in the program. I have an equal number of people that are not participating in the program, and just there's a lot of anger as well, I would say.
But we're not. Are we talking about high rollers, though? I mean, these two guys are regular workers. They're not high rollers. They're not.
Right. No, it's a mix of people. You see everything. So you see the person who's making $70,000 a year, less than that. You see people that have net worth of $40 or $50 million. So there's a wide spectrum.
And what are the chances that the United States would actually reach into the country? Could they do that? Is there any tax agreement with Canada and the U.S. where they could actually seize assets?
Well, in the tax treaty, there is a tax collection article, which the U.S. could rely on. And basically, they would rely on the Canadian government and tax authorities to assist them with their collections. Now, there's actually a difference between people who are Canadian citizens actually have more protection than persons who are not Canadian citizens, because essentially it would be more difficult for the IRS to get the assets of a Canadian citizen. Do we see the IRS coming into Canada to seize assets? Highly unlikely, especially with the foreign bank account reporting penalty, which actually isn't a tax penalty at all. It's under the Bank Secrecy Act. There's not a lot of information about how the IRS could or would enforce this because it's such a new animal.
And are we getting any direction from the feds, the Canadian Finance Department on this one?
So far, no. I mean, all we've seen really, there's been a few observations from CRA as to whether they might assist the IRS in going after assets, and the answer so far has been no under those certain facts. But I think we need more, definitely.
Thanks for coming in. We have to leave it there.
Thank you.
Christine Perry is a cross-border tax lawyer with the firm Keele Cottrell. She was in our Toronto studio. We did ask for an interview with the Internal Revenue Service. That request went unanswered. You might want to weigh in on this one. Go to our website, cbc.ca/thecurrent, then click on the Contact Us link. You can also reach us on our toll-free voicemail line, 1-877-287-7366. Tweet us on Twitter @TheCurrentCBC. You are listening to The Current on CBC Radio 1 and on Sirius Satellite 159. I'm Anna Maria Tremonti.